Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. I'm so glad you're here. If you're the kind of person who loves getting into the nitty-gritty of how things actually work, you're in for a treat today. We're zooming way in to look at the fundamental microscopic building blocks of life and disease. We're going to unpack this incredibly busy, totally invisible world operating inside you literally right now, along with the tiny invaders constantly trying to hack it. Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever actually stopped to wonder what separates a super complex living entity, like, say, a plant cell, from something like the common cold virus? I mean, on a microscopic level, they're bumping around in the exact same environment, but they are fundamentally entirely different in how they're built and how they survive. Today, we're going on a bit of a journey. We'll start with the most complex, highly organized living cells, strip things all the way down to these minimalist cellular startups, and finally, we're going to confront the non-living particles that act as biological hackers. So here's our roadmap for the explainer. We're kicking things off with part 1, the eukaryotic cell factory. Then, in part 2, we'll meet the organelles running the show. For part 3, we'll strip it back and look at prokaryotes, the simpler cells. And finally, in part 4, we'll uncover viruses, the non-living hackers. Basically, a logical progression from the highly complex right down to the absolute bare minimum.
All right, let's jump right into section 1, the eukaryotic cell factory.
I really want you to picture eukaryotic cells, which, by the way, make up you, me, animals, and plants, not just as microscopic blobs of jelly, but as bustling, incredibly organized factories. And they are completely dependent on their internal ultrastructure. Just to clear up the jargon real quick, the cytoplasm inside the cell is strictly divided into specialized, membrane-bound compartments called organelles. Think of them like individual departments in a massive company, walled off so they can do their specialized tasks without anyone interfering.
Which brings us nicely to section 2, meet the organelles.
So let's look at our factory's outer wall, the cell's surface membrane. It's a phospholipid bilayer that spans just 10 nanometers. But hey, don't let that tiny size fool you. This thing acts as absolute top-tier security. It controls the exchange of materials between the busy internal cell environment and the totally chaotic world outside. It's what we call partially permeable, which essentially means it acts like a selective bouncer. It lets the specific substances the cell actually needs pass right through, while firmly keeping the riffraff out.
Now, deep inside, walled off from the rest of the cytoplasm by this thick double membrane envelope, is the largest organelle, the nucleus. This is the absolute CEO of our factory. It houses all the master blueprints for the organism in the form of chromatin, which is basically a collection of DNA and proteins. Every single instruction the cell needs to function, to build, to survive, it all originates right here in this heavily guarded vault.
And right outside the CEO's office is the main production line, the endoplasmic reticulum, or ER for short. Notice the stark contrast here on the screen. On the left, in blue, you've got the rough ER. It's literally studded with these tiny ribosomes for processing proteins. Then, branching off in orange, is the smooth ER. It completely lacks those ribosomes, but it has a totally different yet equally crucial job. It's fully dedicated to producing lipids and essential steroid hormones, things like estrogen and testosterone. And this brilliantly illustrates how the rest of the factory is supported. So once proteins are processed, they head over to the Golgi body, which, honestly, it looks just like a stack of curved Wi-Fi symbols. Its job is to modify and broadcast those packaged proteins in little vesicles for delivery. Then we have the mitochondria with their folded inner cristae. These are literally the power plants of the cell, the exact site of aerobic respiration that generates the energy required for, well, everything else. And finally, every factory needs waste management, right? Enter the lysosomes. These specialized vesicles are packed with really powerful hydrolytic enzymes that break down waste, recycle old organelles, and even engulf microscopic invaders. It's the ultimate cleanup crew. All right, shifting gears to section 3, prokaryotes, the simpler cells. Let's reframe how we think about cells for a second. Think of prokaryotes as the minimalist, free-floating startups of the biological world. They get the job done brilliantly, but they do it entirely without all that complex middle management we just looked at. Do you notice what's missing here? There are absolutely no internal membrane-bound organelles. No nucleus, no mitochondria, no Golgi body, none of it. That red circular tangle of genetic material is just floating totally free right there in the cytoplasm. It's an incredibly streamlined, stripped-down design that is perfectly adapted for rapid survival. So the crucial point is really grasping the stark differences between these two. Let's walk through this side-by-side comparison. First, just look at the sheer difference in scale.
Prokaryotes are a tiny 0.5 to 5 micrometers, whereas eukaryotes can be massive in comparison, up to 100 micrometers across. And, like we just saw, prokaryotic DNA is circular and free, while eukaryotic DNA is linear and tightly wrapped around histone proteins. Prokaryotes divide through a simple process called binary fission, whereas eukaryotes use that complex mitosis process. Even their protein builders, the ribosomes, are structurally smaller in prokaryotes. They're 70s compared to the beefier eukaryotic 80s. And finally, a defining feature. A prokaryotic cell wall is made of peptidoglycan, which is a completely different material from the cellulose you'd find in a plant cell wall.
Which brings us to our final act, Section 4, Viruses, the non-living hackers. We are taking a dramatic shift right now, stepping away from living cells entirely to meet the rogue agents of the microscopic world. I really want to let this sink in. Viruses are not living organisms. This completely breaks the pattern of everything we've established today. It's a massive, massive myth that viruses are just some different type of cell. They aren't cells at all. They cannot independently carry out even the most basic processes of life. I suppose you could call them incredibly lazy, but man, they are undeniably effective.
So if they aren't alive, what exactly are they? Structurally speaking, these microscopic particles are unbelievably tiny. We're talking just 20 to 300 nanometers. They consist of literally nothing more than a simple core of genetic code, either DNA or RNA, wrapped up tightly in a protective protein coat called a capsid. Sure, some might have a few attachment proteins sticking out on the outside, but that is the whole shebang. No organelles, no ribosomes, no power plants. Just bare bones code in a protein shell.
Because they have zero machinery of their own, they have to operate entirely as hackers. The steps of a viral hijack are honestly beautifully sinister in their simplicity. First, since they can't carry out life processes on their own, they use those outer attachment proteins to firmly lock onto a host cell. Then, they simply inject their genetic code to infect it. Once inside, that viral code actively hijacks the eukaryotic factory we talked about earlier. It totally takes over the cell's own ribosomes and energy supplies just to churn out thousands of copies of itself, eventually destroying the poor host cell in the process. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this piece of insider advice straight from the source material. It explicitly warns students, never describe viruses as cells or living organisms in exam answers. Examiners often include this as a trap. I absolutely love highlighting this because it permanently cements the reality for us. You must exclusively think of viruses as non-cellular particles. They are literally just rogue pieces of code wandering around, looking for a factory to exploit. Which leaves us to ponder one massive, provocative thought to wrap up our explainer today. If viruses aren't even truly alive, how on earth have these tiny, dead particles managed to shape the entire evolutionary history of every living cell on the planet? It is this constant, invisible, high-stakes arms race between the beautifully complex cellular factory and the simple, devastating biological hacker. I really hope this journey gave you a profound new appreciation for the hidden, microscopic world operating right under our noses. Keep asking questions, and I cannot wait to explore the next fascinating topic with you.